Hi everybody, we are at chapter 19, Ambushed. They rested for a short while, with Joshua sitting close to Krieg, who lay on the mossy ground until he gained some of his strength back. At length they got up wordlessly and walked into the round opening of the second tunnel. None of them looked back. The tunnel went a relatively short distance into the mountain, and after a steep incline ended in another round opening that spilled them out onto grass. It didn't register right away as they stepped onto it. What they saw now was so strange it was hard to accept at first. Before them a valley extended as far as they could see. There were soft rolling hills, green and lush. A distance away they saw what looked like a settlement of small houses tucked into the landscape. Dotted throughout the valley stood massive pillars of rough-cut stone, reaching far up and toward a ceiling that was so high above them it was hard to make out at all. The stone pillars were easily 200 yards in diameter. The same light source that they had seen in the other cave, or at least Joshua surmised that it was the same, illuminated parts of the landscape like a sun that stood low on the horizon. There were areas that lay deep in the shadows and others that were flooded with light. A slight mist hung in the air, giving the image in front of them an otherworldly quality. The small path in the grass led away from them and far down into the valley. It meandered through the hills, reflecting the light like a thread of silver, and ending in what must have been an ancient mining town during the time when the mountain was still harvested for rare crystallite. That was more than 1,000 years ago. They walked away from the pillar and onto the path. When Joshua turned around, he saw that the landscape behind them extended an almost equal distance, as it did in the front. He realized that the exit from the second tunnel was through one of the massive pillars. Joshua, Krieg, and the wolf were awestruck by the magnificent scope of the land before them. It felt as if a force of great power had created this, a cataclysmic event of enormous magnitude occurred here in ancient times, millennia before the mining operations began. Joshua suddenly felt very small in relation to the landscape around him. He could sense that there was something larger at work here, and he saw himself as just a tiny cog in a huge machinery that turned irrevocably, pushing him in a direction he was no longer sure he wanted to go. The further they moved away from the pillar, the larger it seemed. It became clear to them that the distance to the ruins of the mining town was much further than they thought at first. But having survived the last few hours had lifted their spirits, and they made good time as they traveled down the path and through the hills below. "This is odd," Gray remarked when they were about halfway down the path between the tunnel and the town. "What is it?" Joshua asked. He sat on Krieg's back. They had decided that it would be easier if Joshua traveled the longer distances on the horse's back rather than trying to walk and keep up with the speed of the other two. "The source of light is constant," the wolf answered. "Since we came here, it has not moved. I am just wondering how long it will stay this way." Joshua agreed with Gray. He too had had the brief and fearful thought that it would at some point just go dark. But he pushed the thought away. No sense of playing the game of what if. Living through the ordeals of their journey had helped steel him against the thoughts like this. At least he was able to keep them at bay for most part. That in itself was new to him. When the mining town came closer, they saw that some of the houses were still intact. The path they were on had become a road that eventually would lead into the town center. From it, smaller roads branched off in both directions. The cluster of buildings extended into the hills that surrounded the town. There was a small stream that ran parallel to where they walked. It disappeared underground a little further down the road, only to appear again close to the center of the town. "It is so quiet here," Krieg remarked. "It seems there's no one in here other than ourselves." "No one that lives, anyway," Gray answered. He immediately realized the meaning of what he had said. "I'm sorry, Krieg. I didn't mean—" I didn't want to burden you with more thoughts of wind. Do not concern yourself with it, Grey. I have a sense that she may still be alive after all. Krieg answered. Joshua and the wolf exchanged a brief glance. They saw it in each other's eyes that Krieg was the only one who believed the Pegasus was still among the living. Quietly, they walked the rest of the way until they passed the first house. Most of them had no roofs. Blind windows peered at them. The stone with which they were built was crumbling and overgrown with vines. Some of them had thick layers of moss growing on them. When they stopped for a moment to rest by the small creek, they realized that aside from the slow-running water of the stream, there was absolutely no sound whatsoever. It was eerily quiet. When they continued toward the center and the creek disappeared underground, the sound of Krieg's hooves on the road echoed through the abandoned streets like a reminder that as vast as this cave was, they were alone. Until Joshua became aware of them. Out of his peripheral vision, he saw a shadow move between two buildings. It was low to the ground and fast and gone when he looked again. Then there was another further down the road. Joshua looked at the wolf. I saw it. Gray's thought was quiet. What do you think? Joshua answered as quietly. How the hyenas made it into the mountain? I do not know, the wolf answered. But they are here now. I counted 4 of them so far, 2 on either side of us. Joshua, you stay with Krieg. I will take care of them. Joshua was about to tell him that this certainly was not a good idea when Krieg's thoughts reached them. His were as quiet as their own. I do not doubt you could take them, wolf, if they were among the living. But they are not. They are dead and not bound by the laws you and I believe in. You cannot take them, but be assured that they can take you. Gray looked at him. What do you suggest? We have to stay together, Krieg answered. That is our only chance to get out of this alive and in one piece. There was no time for either of them to form another thought. The hyenas came at them from 2 directions. One came from between 2 houses and charged toward them. Gray, out of sheer instinct, charged toward her. At the same time, another jumped out of a window that was near where Krieg stood. It took the horse completely by surprise. The hyena reached him before he could move. Her huge fangs open, she flew at him. Her teeth scraped his side before he went on his hind legs. That was probably what saved him. She couldn't grab onto his skin and let go for only an instant. It was enough for him to kick her with his front legs, and she winced, retreated back a few feet. The wolf wasn't as lucky. The hyena attacked him with all that she had, and even though he was at least equal in strength and speed, he was no match for her ferocity. Joshua realized that Gray wouldn't last very long. He flew off the horse's back and toward the wolf. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, except to do something to disturb the hyena's relentless attacks. So he landed on her back. It was not a place he wanted to end up, but he didn't have full control over his flying and landing skills. He dug his talons into the hyena's back and started pecking at her. He wasn't sure if she even felt it, but she turned her head once to see what was happening behind her. That was enough for the wolf to charge forward and grab the hyena by her throat. Under normal circumstances, this would have killed her instantly. But even after his teeth had penetrated the skin and flesh, she showed no signs of slowing down. Her attacks just got more ferocious. I don't know how to kill her. The wolf's panicked thoughts came fast. Any ideas? In his periphery, Joshua saw the horse trample the hyena, kicking it several times, but she just got back up and came charging at him again. This was a losing battle. The hyenas did not get tired, and as of right now, there were only 2 of them. Where the other 2 were, he didn't even know. The wolf did not back down, but it seemed only a matter of time before he would need to catch his breath. Suddenly the hyena stopped in mid-attack and ran back up the road. The wolf charged after her. Gray, no! Joshua thought. But the wolf was gone, disappearing between two houses. Joshua flew up into one of the higher buildings, then to another, and one and yet another. From there, he looked down into a courtyard, into which the hyena had first fled. He saw the wolf follow her. The moment Gray stepped into the courtyard, which was surrounded on four sides by stone walls with a small opening through which they had come in, Joshua knew it. "It's a trap!" he screamed in his thoughts. "Get out of there!" As Gray turned, the other two hyenas entered. One came toward the wolf, the other waited at the entrance, guarding it and making sure he would not be able to get out. Joshua didn't think twice about it. He swooped down and went straight for the one at the entrance. As the two other hyenas closed in on the wolf, who was now cornered in the opposite side of the entrance, Joshua landed on the head of the third. He went straight for her eyes. That was the only thing he could think to do. The hyena tried to snap at him, and the first couple of times Joshua was still able to hold on to her. But then she jerked her head to one side, and he lost his grip. He crashed to the ground and lay before her. For an instant, nothing happened. Suddenly, his courage turned into utter panic, and terror-stricken, he tried to get to his feet. The hyena turned her head toward him. Her blind eyes stared at him from above, and he thought he saw her grin. Then her jaws opened to grab him. In that instant, Gray rammed into her, pushing her to the ground. "Go!" he thought to Joshua, and with that he fled behind the next house. And as Joshua flew up, he saw that the three hyenas charged after the wolf. He followed their path from the air. They reached the road and crossed it. The wolf ran through the stream, which was surprisingly deep. It slowed him down enough for the hyenas to catch up. One of them went into the water with him. The others ran further down the road to a small footbridge to cut the wolf off on the other side. When Gray came out of the water, he went in the opposite direction along the creek. The hyena closest to him followed him out of the water and ran after him. But suddenly, something strange happened. When the hyena was just about to reach him, she fell to the ground. She got back up and ran a few more feet before she fell again. This time, she just lay there. Gray looked back and couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The hyena made one more feeble attempt to get up, but then stopped moving altogether. She seemed to fall into herself until, after only a few more seconds, there was nothing left of her but her fur flattened to the ground. And even that seemed to disappear rapidly into the earth. The other two hyenas didn't seem to notice and charged after Gray as ferociously as before. Just when the wolf began to run into the space between two houses, it occurred to Joshua. "Water! It's the water, Gray! There's something in the water! You must lead them into the creek!" Joshua hoped that Gray could still hear him, as he had already disappeared between two houses. But suddenly the wolf came racing back out and straight toward the creek. The two hyenas followed him into it without hesitation. They did not know. It occurred to Joshua that they had no idea what would cause their demise. Gray jumped out of the water on the other side and ran straight toward Krieg, who was still fighting the first hyena. Krieg saw the wolf pursued by the other two, who suddenly lost their footings and fell, tumbling over several times before they stopped moving. Krieg knew instantly what he needed to do and charged toward the creek. The last hyena was hard on his tail when he went into the water. Krieg didn't bother coming back out. He just ran up the stream until the hyena stopped moving. Whatever was left of her body was washed away. The life that had temporarily been forced back into her was gently taken by the stream and so purified of all that was unnatural to her being. Death could finally claim her, and her tortured soul found peace at last. Far above them, unseen, unheard, and unnoticed, the vulture circled overhead, her blind eye peering down at them. Her hatred for the rooster intensified 1,000-fold, and she knew she would not rest until he lay before her on the ground, crumbling and begging for his life. She would take it from him and in doing so, make hers last forever. They stood shaking, the terror still clinging to their exhausted bodies. It was only slowly overtaken by the relief that they had survived. Gray finally lay down in the middle of the road and began to lick his wounds. They were mostly superficial, but could get infected later on. Better to take care of them now. Joshua looked at Krieg's new scars. The old ones haven't even healed yet, he thought, more to himself than to anyone else. They will heal, Joshua, as did all the others, the horse replied. Joshua found himself in awe of the warhorse and the wolf and of what they had endured, were still enduring. Is this what friends do? Stay with you until the end, with no question, no complaint, and with your safety the sole concern inside their thoughts and hearts? He did not believe it possible that friendship could reach such depth. He was humbled before it. He could not have conceived the riches this brought to him, and he could not think of anything he wanted more in his life than this. Even his dream of the 3 feathers seemed dull in comparison. He thought at that moment that as much as he still wished to find them, if he were to be without his friends, he would not want the feathers, not for any price. He would rather stay with Gray and Krieg instead, wherever that might be. They decided to rest for a short while. Wary of what lay ahead, Krieg insisted that they might need their strength and all of it before this was over. At first it seemed odd to Joshua that the horse did not want to charge forth and confront the vulture head on. But then he realized that Krieg, as much as he wanted to see Wind again, was frightened of the condition in which he would find her. It was an impossible situation for the horse, and Joshua wished he could do something about it. Sometimes avoiding one's worst nightmares, he thought, seemed as daunting a task as confronting them. During their brief rest, the wolf caught a few fish in the stream. Krieg grazed on a patch of grass, and Joshua was able to still his hunger on what he found in the soft soil. As they walked out of the old mining town on the opposite side of where they had entered, Joshua considered that, under normal circumstances, the landscape here would probably be worth exploring. He wondered if the large pillars were cut by hand as part of the mining operation, or if they had been here, built up over eons and eons of time. He also wondered about the light source and its origin. How had the hyenas come back to life? And the spiders? He had yet to lay eyes on the vulture. Only in frantic images that he received from Krieg had he seen her. Going toward what could easily be his own death was not something he looked forward to. It was a somber walk through the valley for the 3 companions as they passed a seemingly endless number of pillars that rose from the ground far up toward an invisible ceiling. The light source receded into the distance behind them, and as they continued to move ever deeper into the massive cave, Joshua suddenly realized that it had gotten significantly darker. When they eventually climbed a small hill and stood on its crest looking forward, it appeared as if the massive cave ahead swallowed the light completely. A relatively small distance away from them, the path they were walking on disappeared into utter darkness. "Gray, how far can you see into the cave?" Joshua asked. "Not very far at all," Gray answered. "I don't like this," Joshua added. The thought of not knowing where the next step would lead was frightening enough under normal circumstances. But they also had to think about the possibility of an ambush at any moment. Before Joshua could fully picture hundreds of glowing spiders' eyes in the dark before him, the wolf cut into his thoughts, reminding him once again not to go where he was about to go. "I will be right next to you," the wolf's thoughts reassured him. "And I will be on your other side," Krieg added. "Then what are we waiting for?" he thought, looking up at them. The wolf smiled in his thoughts. Joshua took one hesitant step forward, and then another, and another after that. Gray and Krieg followed, taking their places on either side of him as they descended from the hill and rejoined the path. To anyone watching, it would have seemed as if they simply disappeared into the darkness.